Let's go for it!
Hey everybody, it's me, your buddy Dave, the host here at The Dark Stuff. Thanks a lot for checking out my new video. How do you like my new sweatshirt? It's Failure. Yeah, Wild Type Droid. Yeah, I just saw Failure. You just saw the little clip of them the other night. And that's part of what I'm going to talk about in this today's video. That and another really classic 90s band that I saw again, who is, although they are a 90s band, they are still very much active today, still making brand new music, still up at near the top of their game, if not at the top of their game. So we'll get to all of that. And then after I cover my my brief coverage of some live stuff I've seen, I want to give my thoughts on the new Sex Pistols series, Pistol, which here in the States, it's on Hulu. In other parts of the world, I know it's on like Disney Plus and some other providers. I don't know where it is in your area. I'm not going to look that up for you. That's what Google is for. So let's start with the Failure show, which was just a couple days ago. I saw the band Failure the other night at the Waiting Room, and this was the second time I'd seen the band. I've been a fan of theirs since probably 94, 95 or so, and I became a huge fan with their 1996 album, Fantastic Planet. That's considered by almost everybody to be the band's best album, and just, to me, it's in the top 10 albums of the 90s without question. Just a fucking incredible record. Again, Fantastic Planet, but we're not here to talk about that. I've only seen Failure one other time, and that was just a few years ago when they were doing a tour with Swerve Driver. Hell of a package. I mean, 1995 me, if 1996 me, would have been freaking the fuck out to see those two bands play together. In 2019, I was super blown away, but it didn't seem like, you know, they didn't draw a massive crowd, unfortunately.
Everyone's quite a lot of interest with your face down on it. Say hello to that shaking in your head. You can't see it, but you know it's there, so don't neglect it. I'm taking her home with me, all dressed in white. She's got everything I need, a pharmacy keys. She's falling hard for me.
The show this time drew a healthy crowd. There was no other band opening. There was no co-headliner. There was none of that. It was just Failure, and that was an evening with Failure. So on their social media, they were talking about how before the concert, they were going to play a 30-minute documentary on the band that was going to be coming out, I guess, in 2023. But now, if you're at the show, you can see this thing beforehand. And I don't know if this is a 30-minute segment from it or if this is it, but they played this 30-minute video, and I have to say that it was a really dumb idea to play this before the show. Now, my brief commentary on the video was that I think this is just a 30-minute segment, because seriously 25 minutes of it was the singer of Paramore and Butch Vig from the band Garbage and the record producer, and a guy from Silver Sun Pickups. Butch and the Silver Sun Pickups guys were together, and it was those three just talking about how much they love Failure, how amazing their sound is, how incredible Fantastic Planet is. And my thought is, number one, yeah, I already know that. I'm here at the show. Like, I'm ready to watch the band in person. Like, I already know Fantastic Planet is awesome. I already know. So I just think that was sort of lost. And then secondly, why am I listening to someone from Paramore? No disrespect to them, but for 20 minutes of this thing. I mean, if you don't like Paramore, you're like checking out after 2 minutes of like, who gives a shit, you know? So that was it. I feel like a better way to have handled this would have been that everybody who bought a ticket to the show who comes in gets some kind of code, and you can watch this documentary or the 30-minute preview of it, or maybe the whole thing when it comes out at home at your leisure. You know, maybe it's a one-time watching code or 24 hours or whatever it is. I don't know, but I just thought subjecting people to this right before they're going to see it, it didn't work, in my opinion. You know, what did work, though, of course, was Failure live. Incredible. So you still got Craig Edwards, you got Ken Andrews, Kelly Scott, I think is the drummer's name. So it's the same, core three from Fantastic Planet, and I believe that's who's been making their new records. They've done 3 records in the last 7 years as part of their, comeback, Wild Type Droid being the newest record. I always saw Failure as kind of like space grunge in a way, because they did come from that period, and they did work with Steve Albini initially. Their record started sounding better once they ditched him, but they are very, very sonically precise. They do have this sort of spacey feel, or like sci-fi or whatever, even though that's not necessarily what they're about lyrically at all. They're a lot of times very, very down to earth. They did about an hour set, which just featured a lot of their new stuff from the newer 3 albums, stuff from their second album, Magnified, 1 track, I think, from their debut. And then they took a brief break, and then they came back, and I was thinking to myself, like, okay, I guess they're going to come out and do like their hits or whatever, like their hits. But then they said, okay, now we're going to play stuff from the album that we haven't played anything from yet, Fantastic Planet, and they proceeded to do kind of a Fantastic Planet-oriented set. That's where you heard their best-known songs, of course, The Nurse Who Loved Me and Stuck on You. Songs were great. They sounded great. Very, very enjoyable set. Once again, worth it for Failure. I got mine. I got half of mine. Shut down the whole system. That's my position. Okay, so a couple weeks before that, I saw Built to Spill for, probably the 20th time or something. They are the band that I've seen more than any other band in my music going days. They formed in 1993. They're from Boise, but they get lumped in with Seattle. And I was in Seattle at that time, and I actually remember Built to Spill's first show was being advertised. I think they were going to play at the Crocodile, maybe. And I didn't really understand the significance because I had just begun to get into the Tree People, and I wasn't even aware who Doug Marsh had quit the Tree People and was forming this band. So I've had a long history, but I probably saw them for the first time in 96 or so, 97. And since that time, have seen them on every tour that they've done. I've seen them at festivals. I've seen them at club gigs. I've seen them, any manner of ways. So a few years ago, when I saw them the last time, I thought that they were really, really good, but I wasn't super sold on the lineup. He had the idea behind Built to Spill initially was that Doug Marsh, the guitar player, singer, was going to have a revolving cast of characters because he wanted to constantly be able to change, and he didn't want to be tied down to any one lineup. And that was the way Built to Spill started. The first two albums had different lineups, but then by the third album, he settled on kind of a lineup. And it was practically that way for the next 20 years. They changed, reverted back to a trio, but I felt like the last version of the band was a little sluggish, and still great, but I longed for the older days with the more multiple guitar players and maybe some of the other guys that used to be in the band. So before this new tour, which, by the way, this show was twice canceled because of COVID. It was supposed to be summer of 2020, then it was moved to summer 2021. Now it was here May 26th of 2022. So finally here, there is a new version of the band. Doug has two new players, a new bass player, a new drummer, both women in this case. And they're both great players. I mean, that bass player especially, and I don't know her name, but she did an excellent job. And the drummer was very good too. But what I felt like when I was listening to the show was that although all three are great players, they didn't feel like they were playing well together. And maybe that's just going to come with time. Maybe they haven't been playing together that long. But it just was one of my least favorite Built to Spill shows of the 20 or so that I've seen. Just because the band was not very cohesive and it just didn't feel very together, and I don't know. The place was packed, which was very encouraging that people are coming back and they remember. Built to Spill's new album isn't out yet. They signed with Sub Pop now, so they're going to be putting their next album out on that label. But the fans were still there, after all this time. This place was packed, so my footage is pretty weak because I'm kind of a little bit far back. But, grin and bear it, okay? One thing I didn't want to forget about the Built to Spill show was that this band, Sunbathe, was one of the openers. They're a band from Portland. They played second. I didn't catch their entire show, but I caught most of it. I was given a heads up from a friend of mine who saw them 2 nights before and said, make sure you catch Sunbathe because they're really, really good, and that is true. They are good indie pop, female singer, so it's right up my alley. Very, very 90s heavy and excellent. And I bought that record from them at their merch table. It was that good. I didn't get any shots of them playing, unfortunately, because I just wasn't ready, folks. And then I wanted to make a few comments on the new series Pistol, which came out, which is a mini series. I guess they still use that term on the history of the Sex Pistols, and it's like a 6-part series. And in America, it's on Hulu. Now they advertise it as FX, but there's so much swearing and drug use and nudity and stuff that you're not going to be able to air it on basic cable, so it's not going to be on FX. I don't know how they're involved, but on America it's on Hulu. I've seen some interviews with the cast and the directors and stuff, and it appears in Europe it's on, or at least in the UK it's on Disney Plus, which is pretty crazy because in America Disney is not playing that kind of stuff here. So anyways, but I wanted to get into it a little bit because I found it actually pretty good and much better than I was expecting. Most of the problems that I have with these biopics is it's based on bullshit. They make conversations that nobody could possibly have remembered or recorded, and they pass that off as fact. And the actors, when they usually are performing as the band, look so stupid and so fake that it just turns me off right off the bat. Okay, and they've gotten better at them. The Queen one was good, and I'm sure there's others that are okay. There's just so many shitty ones. So the whole thing is based on Steve Jones' book, Lonely Boy, Tales from a Sex Pistol. So it is obviously his perspective, and that's good, because one of the things that I really... like, the worst part of the Sex Pistols lore and their story, to me, is the Sid and Nancy saga. I so don't give a crap about that era. You know, Sid Vicious, God love him, was a terrible bass player and really brought about the demise of the Sex Pistols, because it made it seem as though they were more about image than they were about music, because he clearly could not play. And even if he learned a little bit, he was so drugged out that it just, I mean, they would turn him off at some times. So the Sid and Nancy thing, and the overdosing, and did Sid kill Nancy and all of that, I just think it's unfortunate that Sid Vicious is like the poster child for the band, because he really shouldn't be. It should more be John Rotten, because he's a lot more significant, and same with Steve Jones. And so the book is based on Steve Jones' book. Johnny Rotten had nothing to do with it, and he's pretty angry about it. There's a lot of clips of him doing interviews on UK TV, just savaging the thing, saying they told him I would be involved, and told me I'd be involved, and then they just cut me out and whatever. Okay, I don't know the truth of any of that. I don't care. None of these actors are people that I've ever heard of, except for one, and that's Maisie Williams, who was in Game of Thrones. She was, I think, one of the Stark, the younger one with the swords. Anyways, Arya. And she plays one of the people in the sex shop, one of the hangers-on, you know, Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood's store, Sex. She worked there, and she had a real striking look, and you see her in old Sex Pistols videos and photos with the makeup across her eyes, and she wore like see-through tops and stuff. I didn't even realize that was her, because of course Game of Thrones ended years ago, so she's gotten a lot older. Did not recognize her. She's the only real name actor in the show, which is good, because then you don't have anything attached to these people, and you don't see them as anyone else. There was a lot to do with Chrissie Hynde from The Pretenders, and they had a great actor playing her. That was Sydney Chandler, who's, I didn't know this at the time. This is from IMDb, but her dad is Kyle Chandler, who was the coach on Friday Night Lights, and he's been on a bunch of other shows. He's a really good actor. So his daughter is now playing Chrissie Hynde, and I knew her story, her connection to the Pistols, because although she's from Akron, Ohio, you know, she moved to the UK in maybe 74, 75, and was living there and experienced all of that, trying to get a band together, but based on this thing, it was very hard. But she had a real relationship with Steve Jones, and they did make it seem as though it was pretty significant. I never really knew that. I just thought she was just kind of, I knew she worked at the shop and she knew all of those guys, but I didn't really know of any real connection with her and Jones, and now I guess I do. At the very, very end of the show, I think in the final episode, they show, you know, what became the Pretenders rehearsing in a studio in England. They show them playing Brass in Pocket for like a minute, and it's like, okay, this is what's going to happen, because she apparently had all these opportunities. You know, they never considered her for the Sex Pistols. She met Mick Jones, and they were working on stuff. She was never considered for the Clash. So it was a lot of the sexism stuff was part of it. Also, could you imagine what the Sex Pistols or the Clash would have been like with Chrissie Hynde? It wouldn't have worked. I mean, Chrissy's awesome, but she was the Pretenders, you know? So one of the ways that you can make the story of a band that only made one album and didn't last more than like 2.5 years into a series is you have to get deep into some of the characters. And so the first whole episode is just the early days with Steve Jones, kind of how he's friends with Paul Cook. They've been friends for a long time. So there's the formation of the Sex Pistols, and how he met Malcolm McLaren, and how Malcolm McLaren, who was their manager, became such a significant person with him and in the formation of the band. Now, I want to make two comments here, and one is that I think the idea that Malcolm McLaren invented the Sex Pistols and created them and all of this is complete and utter bullshit. Maybe he says that, but he is instrumental in introducing John Lydon, Johnny Rotten to the band. But the rest of those guys formed organically, and it was not Malcolm McLaren. The band wrote their own songs. Malcolm McLaren didn't write any songs. But what I did find, because I've been listening to a lot of podcasts lately, one especially called No Dogs in Space, and they did a 4 or 5 part series on the Velvet Underground. And when I listened to it in its entirety. I saw a lot of parallels between the Malcolm McLaren situation with the Sex Pistols and Andy Warhol's situation with the Velvet Underground. Really, there are a lot of similarities. Andy Warhol was a well-known person when he started handling the Velvet Underground. He did not form them. They already existed as a band, but he funded them. He basically set up a scene where they had their entire audience with his factory things. He insisted on putting Nico in the band over the objection of Lou Reed. Malcolm McLaren funded everything. He bought them a practice space. He gave Steve Jones a guitar that he had from Sylvain Sylvain from the New York Dolls. He created the scene of people that were punks that were going to this sex shop that he had. And those people were kind of this scene that was invented. Those were the origins of the fans that went to those early shows were all people that, he kind of provided the initial audience. So it was a lot of similarities with the factory and the sex shop and the way those things worked out. The only other thing I will say about it, because I don't want to make this whole video about the show, is there's a pretty repulsive song on the Sex Pistols' Nevermind the Bollocks album called Bodies. And it's the second song on side 1, the beginning of the album. And I've always interpreted that song ever since I first got into the Sex Pistols in the 80s as being pretty gross, being an incredibly misogynistic song of Johnny Lydon basically attacking women, saying that they're stupid, they don't understand their own bodies, they don't understand what an abortion is, they don't, they're just filthy, disgusting pigs, is kind of the way I heard him in the song. There's an episode of this series called Bodies, okay? And now maybe this is known in the Sex Pistols lore. I haven't read the book. I didn't read Steve Jones' book. I haven't read their books. That this was sort of based on a real person, another one of the early scene people that used to be at all the early Sex Pistols shows, someone that she knew Steve Jones very well. She knew Johnny Rotten really well. Was a real woman who did carry around an aborted fetus in her bag, in her purse. Now, the difference is, in this story, in the version in the show, the woman was in a mental hospital, and she had been raped repeatedly while in the mental hospital, impregnated by her rapist, and then forced to have an abortion. And she was grieving the loss of this baby. It wasn't that she didn't understand what was happening. In the song, the lyrics are, she wasn't aware it killed a baby. She sent it letters from the country. She was an animal. She was a filthy disgrace. And it makes it seem as though she's saying these women are fucking stupid and this is what this is about. But in the show, again, the woman herself called herself a disgrace, called herself an animal because she felt so bad about what had happened. So, again, the lyrics don't fully justify that version of the story, but if it is based this way, they did make Johnny Rotten to be pretty sympathetic to her and a friend. So I've always been kind of confused on that. I'm glad they addressed it, but they didn't really, clear it up entirely. It's still a pretty repulsive song because Johnny Rotten did not want to show a sort of a softer, sympathetic side. He had to be like, fuck this and fuck that. That's the song where they do that. The song musically is fucking brilliant. It's brutal. It's really great. But anyways, that's a long story. So I would say if you're moderately interested in the Pistols, give this one a shot. It's honestly much better than I thought it would be. And it doesn't totally dwell on Sid and Nancy, which is an uninteresting aspect of the story. There's a whole episode on them, Nancy and Sid, and you can't talk about the end of the Pistols without talking about what happened. and how then Sid became the singer at the end because Johnny Rotten quit after the San Francisco gig, and the whole movie they made after that, the Great Rock and Roll Swindle. And then, of course, Nancy Spungeon's death. That's all I've got for you, folks. Until next time. See you later. Bye-bye.